Liz Scott is here with me again. I thought Liz was with me the last autumn, I said, and then I looked back to see about our conversation about open space and other things, because as you'll get the impression we can talk quite a lot. Liz and I, we've got quite a lot in common and some shared interests about the future of the internet. But it wasn't last autumn; it was last February. So it's great to have you back, Liz. Thanks for joining us on the first conversation of this kind.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really looking forward to it, Carl.
And just in a very British way, what's the weather like where you are and where are you?
Well, I'm based in Devon, in a place called Ivy Bridge on the southern edge of Dartmoor. And the weather, I'm just going to look out my window, is, as you would imagine on a January day, very grey and threatening rain is what I would say. Not raining right at the moment, though.
I would like to say, I don't know how you put up with it, but I am putting up with it myself here. A week of rain forecast in Portugal. So
No.
there's no bragging or gloating here about how fantastic the weather is. So yeah, thanks for coming on. This is the first live conversation that we're having for OurNet, the place of conversations. And we were having a little bit of a warm-up sort of connector call before, weren't we, talking about what we might talk about? Not because we're struggling to find something to talk about, but I think editing down all the things we could possibly talk about. And you seem to quite like the idea of this angle that we're taking of OurNet being the place for conversation, because it either doesn't exist elsewhere on the internet or it exists in a particular kind of way elsewhere on the internet. Could we start there?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting the way that social media, and I guess when I talk about social media, I'm talking probably about Twitter and Facebook. Those are the key platforms that I tend to utilize. But conversation in those formats often seem to take just take the form of a little bit of opposite end of the spectrums, having a little bit of a kind of fisticuffs through the internet. It's that kind of like, "Oi, you looking at me like that? Don't look at me like that. Right, let's go outside and let's have a punch up," kind of thing.
Yes.
And you know, it's on one level I can see that when I'm really passionate about a subject, I get lost in that too, and it has that sort of momentary sense of like, oh, this feels really good to tell someone they're wrong, and we're all piling in telling this person that they're wrong. Yes. But ultimately I really get it's not very satisfying, it's not very nourishing, and it's not actually what overall I'm drawn to. And I think in the UK, Brexit has been such a polarizing issue that's been very much on the social agenda for such a long time, that we find that people are really entrenched in their viewpoints. And as soon as Brexit is discussed on social media, it's almost like people pile in from their entrenched viewpoints, not to understand, but to try and beat each other into saying my way is right and you're wrong, and because you don't agree with me, you are this. So I really do sense that there is a place for conversation which is about trying to understand each other's viewpoints, and be respectful, because I don't want to live in a world where everyone agrees with what I think, but I do want to live in a world where I feel that I have a voice and it's respected, and that despite having different viewpoints, we can kind of jog along together. So yes, space for conversations like that I think would be really valuable.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think it's a kind of road rage thing, isn't it? But more of a keyboard rage thing, where it's easy to do that to people, isn't it, when you've got this safe distance. And I think you can also, you know, we've got quite a small medium here. I'm looking at you on a teleconference on a small screen. This is where all the information of the internet tends to emanate from and come at us from, in this small space. And it's almost like a survival instinct, isn't it, to process that and to very quickly judge what's going on. And this is, I think, how people get into arguments and put other people down, is because there is that pace and speed, and it's also safer to do it like this. Because I was wondering, do you find that the same urge offline as well, that there is this closing down of conversations, and where are you in that? And would you agree that the internet is a very easy place to fall out with people at a safe distance?
Yes, my sense is that offline the dynamics are very different when you're in conversations. So for example, if I if I get a group of people around dinner table, and I know, for example, that Brexit is a hot topic,
Yeah.
we tend to kind of by mutual unsaid agreement not talk about it. Because we kind of know that it's not good, like we're there to connect and to have a good time, and that moving into that space isn't going to be helpful.
Mm.
And also I do think that we tend to temper our language, and when we can actually see visually and read body language and all of that, when we're kind of getting a sense and being empathetic and compassionate about the person we're with, we tend to temper and be more skillful in the way that we're putting across our points. That's my experience anyway, and that just might be the people I kind of hang out with.
That's so interesting. I totally understand that. And, you know, it's not long since Christmas, is it? And that's the classic time for people who disagree with each other to come together by a sense of duty or whatever that is. And we could reframe the internet, couldn't we? But because it's a safe distance, we could take more risks. And it doesn't have to be the risk of being eggy and confrontational. It could be the risk, and I like to do this, you know, I feel like it's safer to go a little bit further with people in conversation. But, you know, there are rules for that, and there are better and worse ways of doing it. But we could actually reframe this little frame that we look at as it is safe to talk to people in a way that you might not get away with across a crowded Christmas dinner table with your nearest and dearest. We could go there, I think.
Yeah, I personally, I'd really like that. I personally would love to hear. I guess I'd love a safe space almost. I say a safe space, but there are areas, for example, where I might not be politically correct. Or I might think, I don't know if this is politically correct or not, but I'd love to be able to have a conversation and better understand whether this is you know a conversation that is legitimate, and I can try and understand someone else's point of view.
Yeah.
So I think there are areas that it would be so helpful to do that, and I think so. There are some of the bigger political issues or the bigger global issues, I guess we could say, that it would be really helpful to have conversations with people around in that respectful space. And I guess what's just popped up to me now, Carl, is that really what I see with social media is that it's a place to broadcast. It's not a place to listen.
Yes.
And I think that's what's probably really missing. And isn't that interesting? It's just come up to me now as we're talking, is that it's who can shout the loudest. It's like it's a bit like in the UK, if you've seen the House of Commons, and it's like this massive debating club, and people don't realize that the reason that it's set aside like two groups, like the opposition and the government, it's set like that is because in the olden days they had to keep people far enough apart so that they were more than 2 swords width away, so they weren't actually going to get up and kill each other.
Is that right?
Yeah. So that's why it's set at this kind of, you can't go over the line to when you're in the House of Commons debating something, and that's just historic. Yeah. So there's a kind of, it's set up to create arguments in a safe way, so you don't actually die.
Yes.
Actually, I think that in a way that's kind of that's not really the society now I think I want to be part of. I want to be a part of a society that is listening and trying to understand, and also being heard. So all of those things, and then almost like mutually going, okay, that isn't what I think is right, but do you know what, I get that's where the majority want to go, and so I'll go with it.
I'd love to draw on your experience as a facilitator, because this is an issue of ground rules and context, isn't it? Is that the technology of the internet makes it the place it is in many ways, and the context has been accepted. So if you contextualize or study and analyze the context of Facebook and Twitter, and we could do, it's a game you can play, isn't it? Like Twitter is not unlike the House of Commons thing you spoke of, where people are trying to sort of kill each other off with word swords, or kill each other off with 140 characters. And then Facebook is like a bit of a pub, isn't it, where you show your photos and you brag about this, that, and the other, and your football team, and etc. And then you can have a virtual bloody row on there. And then if we move to this more sublime end of the spectrum, which I'm hoping OurNet is part of creating, there is an expanded space for conversation being heard and encountering people who you think you don't like, or whose views you don't think you like, in a respectful way. Now, as a facilitator, how, in the real world, how do you make safe spaces for that? Because that's what you do, right? For a living, is create a different context in which people can communicate, rather than just wanting to kill each other with swords.
Yeah, it's very true. And I suppose at the heart of our work, when you look at what we're about, we are, so as a facilitator, what we're doing is we're bringing people back to a space of commonality. And in essence, we do that as coaches in our conversations with people too. It's like, rather than focusing and creating the sense of what makes us separate and individual, and so all we can do to communicate is almost like loggerheads like this.
Yeah.
We're saying what is it what is at our roots, what connects us, who are we at the core of our true being. And so for me, I think one of the things that's really missing in our world today is this sense of who we truly are, this spiritual sense of connection. And people will have different language for it, but ultimately at the core of who we truly are, we recognize that in each other. That is what has us feel connected with another person, is that we kind of get, there's something else going on. There's something that is more true between us than the opposing views that we hold.
Yeah.
So I guess to answer your question, as a facilitator, what we're ultimately doing is we're having people reconnect or recognize that within themselves, that is the same as all the people in the room. And then what you do from that space is you then lay out on the table, well, and this is how I now see the world from my individual viewpoint. But you've established that at some level there are some elements where we are principally all the same. So that is what I see is what goes on when you're facilitating with people.
Oh, lovely. And I suppose from what I immediately thought was, establishing ground rules is a classic situation that a lot of people have been in on a training day or so on, and there's somebody with a flip chart who writes down what the ground rules are, and you get, confidentiality, and what goes on in the room stays in the room, etc. It's not just about that, is it? That's a very formal and digital part of it, I suppose, isn't it? And superficial part of it. And what I think you're saying, and I'd love you to say more about it, is nothing very magical happens until people do get in a conversation with each other and start sharing and start listening.
Yeah. And I see that sharing and listening are a symptom of having a deeper recognition of who you truly are at that core essence level of who we are turning up in the world as human beings. So when somebody writes a list of ground rules on a flip chart, and I do, of course I do as a facilitator, it's really important that those are there. But ultimately, they are symptomatic behaviors of people deeply respecting each other and wanting to hear each other's voices in the room.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time, what happens when we set rules and ground rules, and for my job as a coach, for example, is that I was very focused on almost the behavior. It's almost like, how can we have people behave in a certain way, and then everybody will be happy.
Yeah.
But actually what I'm finding is that when we actually just connect to that deeper sense of who we are, it's a real settled, peaceful energy that is at the core of our very being. Then we naturally want to listen and respect each other's points of view and are respectful. it's a symptom of that. It's not something we actively have to try and do. So I don't know if that makes sense, if you can.
I'm getting a sense of it. And what I'm realizing is I'm doing a really cheeky thing and bringing you as an unpaid consultant to OurNet when I ask the next question, is how we, and you might say, I'm not telling you this without an invoice, but how do you do that then online? That's the thing, isn't it? And I do get a sense of the sacred space you're talking about, with wanting to, without wanting to sound too lofty about it. And what comes to mind is another question I want to ask you is, were we better at it in these mythologized legendary times of when we lived in smaller communities and there was a talking stick and there were elders, and you know how we've got this view of indigenous or ancient cultures that were smaller and more magical than our own right now? Is what you're doing in those small spaces a kind of resonance of that? And is what is required to have smaller, more respectful, quieter, more peaceful spaces in which that atmosphere can be created?
The short answer is I don't know, but I'm happy to speculate. My sense is that I think it's really, really simple. And the work that I do more and more is simplifying what can feel like a very complicated world. In my world, I mean, I'm not talking about the outside world, just my world can feel very, very complicated. So I'm going to take you, like the walk I did this morning, and I take my dog for a walk every morning, and we go up onto Dartmoor and then we walk through the lanes. And it just so happens I've been running a retreat this weekend. So, I'm in a really good space. I'm in a really, really kind of settled space. And from this settled space, I began to really notice the bird song. I noticed it's very muddy at the moment underfoot, the sort of the squelchiness of the mud. Yeah. I noticed how some rain was trying to come in and then it sort of didn't come in. And I saw some crows sort of fly out of the trees and swirl around and then kind of make a lot of noise and settle back down again. And I just had this extraordinary sense of, now it was gratitude, but it wasn't me doing gratitude. I wasn't like forcing myself to look at things and go, oh, isn't this lovely? And this is very beautiful. It was this real sense of like, wow, this is such an extraordinary world we live in. And I do this walk every single day, but suddenly I'm being blessed with seeing it, just seeing the magic of it sort of just unfold in front of me. And it was extraordinary. It was really extraordinary, that space. So I think that there's something about when we naturally fall back into this space of recognition of that deeper creative energy that comes through us, all of us, every single person on the planet. A symptom of that is that we just completely sort of immerse ourselves in the beauty and magic of what it is to be human. And it is an extraordinary, beautiful experience to be a human being. I mean, it's extraordinary experience.
Yeah.
Now, when I talk of spirituality, and for me, it's the most ordinary thing in the world. Like, for me, when I look at my dog and I laugh, or I just kind of fall into the moment of just seeing him being himself. Yeah. That's spiritual. That's a spiritual experience. It's that connection, that love, that sense of like, there is a connection between all of us. There's an energy between all of us. And for me, it's so simple. There's nothing complicated we need to do. We don't have to go to India and find a guru. It's like, it's there. It's waiting for us just to recognize it within us. And then as we recognize it, we just naturally see the world. It's a bit like, a pebble on the beach looks very boring, and then you put it in the water and then it suddenly comes alive with all these colors.
I have noticed that.
Yeah, it's a bit like that. The world takes on, it's the same world, but suddenly it takes on a different vibrancy. And connecting with people from that space and coming back, wheeling all the way back to that question you were asking about OurNet, is my sense that that is the space. Like I would want from that space, and I go in and out of it. I'm not like that all the time, trust me. But in that space, I really want to deeply understand somebody else's sort of how they see the world. I'm curious.
Yeah.
It's not threatening in any way to my world, because I know that there is a deeper truth that is more satisfying and nourishing than anything that I kind of engage my head in the outside world. So to me, that, I think, helping people plug back in, if that's the right word, to what is already present in them, they don't need anything else, would be the greatest gift that I think we could give anybody. So if OurNet is able to somehow replicate that, it would be, oh my God, it would be so awesome.
I'm writing down that as a request, and I'll pass it on to our technology team to interpret. But what I really hear you saying, and that's always been my very similar sort of wish of mine of how OurNet might be. And our founder and CEO, Mike Brody, who you know, I don't think has any particular wish to have a sort of editorial slant like that. You know, what came up for me when you were talking there is the importance of not just the conversation, but the context. Because what you seem to be saying was the context gives birth to a particular kind of conversation, as in the water, the salt water of the sea brings the pebble alive in a way that you've not seen before. So your conversation, I suppose, is your view of the stone, but that wouldn't have happened without the stone being in the water. And that, to me, is the really important thing about what you're saying, or what I think you're saying. Because we were laughing before, weren't we, about, we often think we understand each other, but we probably don't. And it's keep bumping along, isn't it, thinking that we do. But my thought of what you are saying is that the context is equally powerful as what's being said. And that's the thing I think Mike is really wise to have wanted to bring to OurNet, and how he's founded it. Yeah. Is the recognition of the context, because that's not what many other platforms do. The context is technological. It is what it's called. It is what it is. And not much attention is paid to that context and the quality of life that it brings. So, of course, if you encourage people to disagree or even agree with each other in 140 characters, or is it 280 now, and the loudest, nastiest voices rise to the top, you will have a particular product and a particular consequence, won't you, of having that kind of technology and that kind of rating of online behavior. So that's what I'm taking from what you said anyway, that context is so incredibly important and so overlooked in the way that, you facilitate a group, you're creating a context in which something can happen. You create any online platform, you cannot not create a context. Like the medium is the message. And it seems to me that so much of our technology, not much analysis or recognition is given to the context and the medium that's being created and how that affects the conversations that ensue from there.
Well, I certainly see that there's something about it. I guess this is your world now and not my world. But there's something about what kinds of conversations you encourage and on the platform, because that, I guess, will then attract the kind of people who want those sorts of conversations to engage in those conversations. So at some level, I'm really curious with you guys how you would even start to do that.
Yeah. Well, if I may, and I was explaining this to somebody who might be joining our team on Saturday, it was. And excuse me, just 1 minute. I just turned the volume down rather than cough over everybody then. I was talking to this young woman who may join the team on Saturday, and she was squeezing in the conversation before a family party. And the analogy that came to mind in terms of the technology that we want to employ as a mirror of what happens in real life is at a family gathering, and we mentioned Christmas before, there could be archetypically two uncles. One uncle is what you might call in the British vernacular a miserable old sod, and with his views that are very opinionated, and his only allies are his long-suffering wife and maybe another mate or something who doesn't want to give up on him because they see through all that facade of his, how he's being. And then there's another uncle who has a big crowd in front of him because he's charismatic and he's laughing and he's speaking from his experience, and he might not be such a judgmental guy. And so often the uncle you love is that second one, the latter, not the former. And that, I think, is the technology that's missing from the web. What we're having at the moment is the aggrandizement of the loudest and nastiest, because, like we know from the media forever, that's what sells and that's what people think people are interested in. Yet we also know that which uncle we'd rather be with, whose company we'd rather be in. And that, I think, is the technological interpretation that's required to bring the conversations that are not editorially right, not that they've got the right opinion, but they are the contextually useful, in as much as they are engaging, warm, interested, people are listening. That to me is what it makes for an enriching conversation, even if you don't agree with somebody.
No, I love that. It's a really simple sort of analogy with the two uncles about what you're trying to create.
Yes.
Because I guess in a way, using that analogy, the uncle that isn't surrounded by people that want to listen to his views naturally will try and find a platform where his views are, there is some sort of agreement and solidarity behind what he's saying.
And we'll have a group for that. We'll have a group of grumpy uncles who love talking to each other in that way, and they find their brethren and kindred spirits in that place, because it's that's not a judgment about that guy. And also, what I hope our algorithm does is like social feedback, because you, as that uncle, we can all imagine being him as well, can't we? Like, and thinking, how come the other uncle has got that big crowd around him? And we've all been there, I think, haven't we? As teenagers, as children, we've all looked at other behavior and thought that might be a better way of getting my needs met. So that could be part of it as well.
I'd be really curious then. So you're going to have different groups for different uncles. So how does it different then from, say, groups that you would see on Facebook? And I know Facebook quite well, so that's quite easy for me to understand as a comparison, maybe.
Well, here's the thing. It's not going to be very different apart from the contextualization. And that to me is everything here. And that's our experiment. Personally, that's me as chief conversationalist, if you like, as town crier and community builder of OurNet. The technology is not breakaway, surprising, especially innovative. Groups of people online is not a new idea at all. But creating a contextual awareness of how and why people come together, I think, will be the powerful part of this. So that will be the overwhelming, I suppose it'll be a reminder or positioning, that we are in a conversation, and all that means. Because you were saying earlier on, you used the word disgust as in discussion, and it sounds like disgust, doesn't it? And that is what happens. Things get discussed, and people get disgusted in the kind of polarity of a lot of social media. I found out the other day that conversation, I thought you meant like against something. It does mean with something as well, doesn't it? But conversation in its original French meaning, I believe, is a literal translation of where you live, as in where you put yourself. And that to me just added to this whole idea of OurNet being the place for conversations. It's like, it's where you have your being, it's where you live, it's how you express yourself. And that's what these groups will be. It won't be an editorialized matter of like, polarity necessarily, although that's fine too. But there will be this reminder that this is a conversation, and that it is hopefully divergent and expanding in terms of how people relate to each other, rather than just the standard echo chambers, which are available anywhere. You can go and find a group that has your view, and you can talk about people who don't have your view as the others, and have a sense of group with that. And we probably will have that. But what the added possibility, the way we're looking to position this, is that what about this that may not have been talked about or considered? and the generosity that you spoken of, I mean, the generosity of attention is the invitation we'll leave open to people, and we hope to make that explicit.
Mm. And I guess the thing I would like to see is the sense of listening and being heard. And that for me is something that, I mean, as a coach, that's something that obviously is part and parcel of the world I kind of live in. And I would love to see that sort of replicated in some sort of conversation platform, which is, because a lot of times conversation is very much about trying to tell somebody your viewpoints in as many ways as possible until you kind of batter them into submission.
Yes.
But actually there's something very different about listening and understanding another person's viewpoint, so that there's a kind of a sense of enriched learning, I guess, in a conversation. So I would love it if that was present in OurNet, as part of what you kind of go, oh yeah, I want to use OurNet because that's the space that I know that can happen in.
That is exactly, for me anyway, that is exactly what we're hoping to do, to, not be right or wrong necessarily, but to, I guess, one great experience, and one that I think is missing, is to feel a sense of expansion of your awareness, which I suppose, I think maybe that's what you were calling education, then possibly is just, how we open up to things. And it's like the idea that we could have an idea in our mind without having to agree with it. That might be an evolutionary step even, mightn't it, for humans?
Well, yes, it might be. And but I wonder if actually that sounds like it's an evolutionary step, like that's the next step to go to. But my sense it's like that is what we were built for, and somehow we've believed something else. So this is almost like going back to that, which is the way we're built for. So
yes,
yeah.
Well, and we've just had a little bit of a glitch almost, or I think it has to be kept in mind that we don't really understand the internet very well, do we? We have ideas about it, and it's really new and young. And the thing that occurred to me the other day was like, how it is that people are really upset that there are false facts on the internet. And I was thinking, okay, if you run into your local cafe or pub and you shout something out like, just a question, what do you think of Brexit, for example, without opening a floodgate now of whatever. I think among those 40 or 50 people, you'll get a roughly polar view, and then you'll get 40 or 50 different interpretations within that spectrum. Then if you scale that up to how many people are on the internet, how on earth could we possibly expect a uniformity of answers? I think we're a bit naive about how the internet is, frankly. And again, it's in the conversation that we discover things, not just demanding it by typing it into Google.
So go on. Say a bit more about that, Carl.
I just think we're incredibly naive about our expectations of the internet, and like how unfair some people seem to think it is that there are wrong answers on there, and it's like, so what do we do about that? And typically now I understand that Facebook are employing a new big group of people in the UK to do this fact checking thing, and I understand that as a human response. It's kind of what we want, isn't it? As if in terms of transaction analysis, we just want the adults to tell us as children what the right thing is. And I again, that to me reflects a kind of naivety or innocence or newness about where we're at with the thing. And I just don't think the long-term issue here is about the right answers. It's about how mature people can be and how big and expanded people can be within a complexity of information, if that doesn't sound sort of too lofty and pseudo.
Yeah, and I guess for me then, I guess how that lands with me is that there is a complexity of information, and I think the internet is a magnifying glass of what feels often like a very complicated world. It's been amplified. The volume's been turned up almost in the noise in what we don't understand.
Yeah.
And I guess that the temptation that I see is that we try and manipulate the volume, whereas actually what I see, and again it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is for me the missing piece is that people look within to that settled space within, and then connect and communicate from that space. It just gives a different sense of what this is all about, to be human. So that for me is the bit I would be really curious about how that pans out on OurNet.
I think all I can say is watch this space, and don't just watch it. Please help us do that, is my invitation to you. And I'm aware that I've talked a lot about OurNet and kind of hijacked the conversation as an OurNet promo, which for the sake of transparency it is to some extent. But I'd love to finish by you sharing, because I think people will have heard this conversation and say, yeah, I like how Liz is thinking. She said she was a coach. She said she runs groups. If people want to find out more about what you do and think, yeah, that's the kind of coach I want, how do they find out about you, Liz?
Yeah, well, I'm part of something called innercompass.com. That's Inner Compass is the name of our business. And it's kind of what I've been talking to you about is it's supporting people getting back in touch with a very natural inner compass that we all have within us. And that is that's it. That would be, that's it there. And it's about pointing people back home to who they truly are. And people have just got lost. That a lot of people we come across are mentally exhausted. They've been trying to spin all the plates, trying to work things out in their minds. And they've just lost sense of who they truly are. It's really simple. It's not complicated, our message at all. So we're pointing people back home, back to that space of calm, back to that settled space that is connection, is creativity, is empathy, is compassion, is gratitude. And one of the things we're really passionate about is developing and supporting communities and geographical communities. I'm sort of looking at the moment in my world that are based on well-being.
Yeah.
So communities based on well-being is at the heart of what we're about. And we're just about to launch ourselves as a community interest company, where that becomes our real focus. So hopefully that's given you a flavour of innercompassguide.com.
And it is your remit or your wish to see what I heard there is how well-being has become quite an esoteric and occult matter, isn't it? And it's individuals who do it sort of secretly and quietly at the weekend and then go back to the fray during the week. When you say communities, are you looking at like groups of people taking this on as a way of being for their entire community?
Yeah, possibly. I've just started a 12-week experiment in my local community, which is Ivy Bridge. And I'm just at the stage now of investigating how people view well-being. What is well-being in their world? And what I've noticed is that, you see, in the clamour of what we see and get scared of what we see, I don't know, on the news or reading the newspapers or engage with on the internet, is actually when you actually go out and see people and you see the extraordinary kindness of people setting up coffee mornings, veterans groups, toddler support groups, a variety of groups at the local library, all led by people that are either very poorly paid or are volunteers. It kind of, you go, actually, this world isn't as scary as I thought it was. Yeah. When you actually go and see the people who are doing this stuff. So what I see a lot of is that people get scared of the stories that they hear and the stories they tell themselves. And I feel that what we can really offer within a compass is helping people see through those stories and see that they're just stories, and to get back in touch with that sort of that ballast, or that core of who they truly are. And then from that space, just navigate through the world and do what makes sense. And I do think it's really simple. I think when people do engage in seeing who they truly are, they just naturally want to engage with people in a way that is empathetic and compassionate and supportive. It's really not a big deal. It's nothing. It's like it's the most ordinary thing in the world. Like,
So
why wouldn't you?
yes, absolutely. And as you say, or seem to be saying, so much is working already, isn't it?
It really is. This isn't about me telling people to do anything differently. This is what I'm seeing is about supporting what's already going on. And I think there is an added piece I can give to people, which is seeing that they've already got the very thing that often they're looking for either in a group or in a practice or in trying to get somewhere, is the very bit they're looking for, is the very bit they are. That's the bit I think I can really support people with.
Fabulous. And I think that's a great note to end on. Suffice to say, let's join forces with that, because I'm totally inspired and in agreement with you. So it'll be, and that's not to say I don't work with people I don't agree with, not with you, because bearing in mind the conversation we've had before. But lovely to be on the same page with you with that, and I'm hoping OurNet can support that as an online tool as well. And wish you the best with that, because I love this how you're scaling that up.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, it's all an experiment, and I'm loving it, Carl. And it's been really fantastic learning more about OurNet, and really looking forward to seeing it when it's launched and being part of it.
Well, next week. Okay?
Released. When it's released, not launched.
Released, not a launch. And we looking for lovely people like yourself who understand where we're at and understand the context and everything, and just want to help us, want to grow with us with this idea. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you chatting with me today.
Oh, thank you. It's been really great to connect with you.
Excellent. All right. Bye for now. Stay in touch.
Bye.